How you guys all doing today? Good. So let's jump right in. When I first started using WordPress, I used it like many of you did, start off blogging. It was for a startup I had been working with. And I started digging a little bit deeper into WordPress and discovered, playing around with some themes. And when I installed some of these themes, I noticed that these little menu items would show up on the left for certain types of content. And I thought this is the coolest thing in the world. So if I installed something that was like a tourism theme, it'd show like hotels, attractions on the left. And I actually took a little digging around forums to realize that these were what called custom post types. And I absolutely fell in love with this idea of, being able to organize, structure content, in a way that just made sense. It was easily organized on the back end, made sense on the front end for display. So fast forward, this was back in 2011, fast forward a few years, started CyberSprout along with my wife, and our first project out of the gate was Alexandria Tourism. And when we got the project, it was over 200 pages. Sounds like a lot of content. The problem was it was a ton of duplicate content. And it was a nightmare for them to keep organized, to update even a phone number for a single hotel. They had to dig through and find the 7 or 8 different pages where that phone number was listed. So they were spending all their time maintaining the site instead of building it up, making it a better resource. So when we redesigned it, added in these custom post types, content templates, custom fields, which many of you have used, it ended up coming down to 15 pages, so it shows how much duplicate content there was. There was around 40 entries between the lodging and attractions, so it became much, much easier for them to maintain. There was also a lot clearer layout structure for search engines, so they understood the layout, and their search traffic just from this went up 57% over the course of the next year. And the following year, it actually went up another 70% because instead of them spending all their time maintaining that content, they're able to build that content up, add a lot more exciting resources in there to be able to draw in those visitors. So I think, the way that we organize and we lay out these custom post types can be a very powerful thing, not just for internally, but also for search engines and the way we find our traffic. Who in here has set up custom post types before? Awesome. Many of you, but I'm going to go over quickly on the basics for those of you who haven't set them up before. And I think the first question you want to ask yourself is, when is it right to use a custom post type? And a lot of times it just doesn't feel right to go into a blog post. Maybe it's static content. It doesn't need a published date. It doesn't have to be timely, but it doesn't fit well on a page because it's something you want to feed in, you want to loop it into another section of the site. There's a lot of different reasons. A lot of times it's just it's going to be different for every case. It just doesn't feel right. A lot of times it needs its own set of grouping, taxonomies. So taxonomies is just a fancy way of saying categories or tags. It's a way of grouping content together. And what as I just mentioned a few seconds ago, you want that content to be able to feed into different parts of the website, so that way you're not having to replicate and push that same content out in certain spots. And also the ease of use compared to pages. Custom post types are much more flexible. It's easier to add custom fields to it, content templates. There's a lot of different flexibility with those custom post types. So this is a screenshot from the plugin toolset types. I like to use this plugin instead of doing it with custom code. At the basis of it, you really only need to have the name and the slug, and that is it to get your custom post type. After you set that up, it'll show up on the back end. You can start populating content. There are some other features you can add on there as well. A lot of times you want to have a thumbnail on there, the featured image, so you have that when you feed it through. Excerpt, people like to customize that little summary. But, things like author, if it's something like, hotels, doesn't make sense to really have an author pinned along with that. So you do have that flexibility with the custom post type. Taxonomies as well, and this talk could almost be called organizing custom post types with taxonomies, a lot of it, because taxonomies are phenomenal. And taxonomies, the ones that we're most familiar with, the categories and the tags. And the categories would be hierarchical, where you have it to where you can tier it. You can have parent and child entries, terms. And the ones down here are flat. Flat is where there's no priority given to any of the entries within there. And it's meant more for like unlimited entry for categorization. And for those of you who are wondering, that is Paul Bunyan land. That is from the movie Fargo. And I am from Minnesota, so I like to pull in some of the Minnesota highlights. Big Ole is from my hometown up there. So once you've entered in these custom post types, they don't just show up on the front end. You have to find some way of linking to them. The easiest way is to just link to whatever the slug is for that custom post type, and it'll show up using the WordPress default archive. Super simple, but you can use a custom loop if you want it to show up in a more tailored manner, whether it be in a grid, a list style, however you think is best for your site. There's a lot of widgets out there that natively support custom post types and taxonomies, like recent posts extended, and then also page builders. Page builders have added a lot of support for custom post types and taxonomies that make it really easy to display. And then taxonomies, if you want to, you can link to individual terms. You can't link to the taxonomy itself. That won't show anything, but you can link to those individual terms within there and use that WordPress default archive. So now that we've kind of covered the basics, now let's get into how do we push this a little bit farther? How do we organize this content? Now it seems like an odd spot to start is with the default taxonomies, because that's already in there. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize is you can take those default taxonomies and apply them to your custom post types. So if those categories and tags already make a lot of sense for your post type, you don't have to create a separate custom taxonomy for that custom post type. You can pull in those default tags and categories and apply it together. And it makes a ton of sense because then it gives you a way of linking that together. So if you had something like a store and you're selling those products and those categories match up, now on your sidebar for those blog posts, you can show those products, and now they're going to be relatable to whatever your topic is. So it makes a lot more sense to the end user that's going through his blog posts that can see these related products for whatever topic that they're looking at. Now, custom taxonomies, those default categories and tags aren't always going to make sense, so we're going to want to create our own. Again, this is with the toolset types plugin, and they're very simple to set up as well. You really just need the name, the slug, whether you want it hierarchical like categories or flat like tags, and then which post types these are going to be applied to, and you can apply it to multiple ones. And one thing I also like about this is it doesn't have to be necessarily you're applying these to your custom post types. This could be to, like in this example, events from the Events Calendar plugin. So if you want a way of tethering multiple post types together, it's a fantastic way of creating that link. Multiple taxonomies, there's no limit to the number of taxonomies you can add on there. This is something that I wish I had discovered a little bit sooner, thought of, is the fact that you can add in as many of these taxonomies as we want. So you see this very commonly in things like real estate, tourism. So in this case, this attraction, we wanted to not only be linked to which town it's in, but also, which season is it most applicable. But I've also seen it with like real estate, where they'll have for each property, they can have a taxonomy for agents, number of rooms, which neighborhood it's in, price range, whatever makes sense for the way you've got your site set up. This one's a little bit more outside the box, and I thought that this was a fascinating way of doing it. And I've run into this a lot of times where I've got my custom post types set up, and I really like that custom post type, but I also want that as a taxonomy. I want that as an entry to be able to organize, but I don't want to necessarily create duplicates. So every time I have to enter a custom post type entry, I've also got to create a term within a taxonomy. So this plugin called CptOnAmis. I thought was kind of a clever invention by this developer, where essentially you can take a custom post type that you've created and you can apply that as a taxonomy to other custom post types. So now you don't have that double entry. So, for example, in this case, I wanted to, with the towns, I wanted that to be its own indexable page. Not that taxonomies aren't, but a lot of times it's got that flexibility where you can loop it in. But I can also apply this now to events, attractions, resorts, so that way it's tethered together with all these other custom post types that just make sense. Because people want to know, if I'm going to be going to this town, what are the events that are going on, what resorts are there, what are the things to do. The other thing too is I could have tied this to posts as well, so that way people could see, if there's articles being written, if this is for all the places to go see within Minnesota, if this article is written, this is the specific town it was written about. I think that's a fantastic way to tether that all together. There are a few limitations for using this plugin after playing around with it a bit. For one, because they are custom post types, they won't be recognized as a taxonomy by other plugins, so some of those other widgets I'd mentioned, or if it's a page builder, it won't pick that up as a taxonomy as a way to filter, so you may need some custom solutions to be able to support that, to display the content as you see fit on the front end. But all in all, I think it's a really cool feature if your use case makes sense. Now, if that last one doesn't make sense for you, another alternative could be custom archives. And a lot of times I find that when we develop that custom archive, we tend to just do it kind of in the usual manner. We're going to just put it together in a list style format. We're going to make it look pretty, but it's going to be a list style format. Maybe it's a grid, but that's about it. I feel like sometimes this is something that we overlook because these archives are indexable by search engines. So if somebody's landing on this archive, does it make sense that it's just in a list style format with no context? There's no introduction, there's no additional resources. Is it just a list? Is it not segregated within there if there are multiple post types within that archive? So if we did this again using our town example, and we wanted to pull all this data in. So the towns, we had those resorts and attractions as far as the two different post types. And also we want these towns to have some context. We want people that are potentially going to visit here to know, what is this town about? What is this town known for? What are some other resources that you can take advantage of if you want to go visit here? So it's just a quick example I spun up here. You can see now that has a little bit of a, lorem ipsum description, not super descriptive, but it's got the guides as well on the right, so if somebody's coming during the summer, autumn, or winter, they know exactly the things to do then, things to consider, but as well, they know where to stay and what to do. And that's usually the biggest questions that people are asking when they're going there is, now it's all in one spot. Plus, if somebody finds this from a search engine, this all makes sense to them. They have everything that they need in that one spot. A lot of times, we try and dictate, the user flow and how people find content, how it's linked together. But a lot of times, it's best left to the end user, the visitor that is on the site. Let them search. So one thing that's brilliant about with custom post types and with these archives is we can let them find the content that they want. Again, this is using the toolset plugin where they set their filters, and once they set their filters, it reloads with Ajax, and so they can very quickly and easily find those custom post types. So I can list all that content on one page, but from a UX perspective, it's very easy for them to find whatever they're looking for, whether that be attraction or hotel. This one I just have attractions in here, but I could easily have multiple post types in there. I could have events. I could have, the lodging, blog posts. It makes it really simple for them to be able to find the content that they want. Sometimes we want to go a little bit deeper into the content, where, for example, here with the resort, we know we want to stay at a resort in this town, and we want to kind of get a quick high-level view of all these resorts. But one thing that's unique, and the town I'm from is very well known for being a resort town, and all these resorts are very unique compared to a lot of others, and even their accommodations there, every cabin is dramatically different from the next one. So what they want to be able to do is highlight all these different cabins, whether it be a multifamily cabin, if it's just like a little single one for a single family, or is it one that's on the beach? Is it set back in the woods? So being able to do this with parent-child relationship, and the one thing I like about this versus the other ones we were talking about, taxonomies are grouping large amounts of content together. The parent-child relationship is it's a lot more personal. It's a one-to-one relationship. So that way, for example, with this resort, we can set all the different cabins that they have on the right, and all these are very unique. Like Sugarbush Lodge there, that one can sleep up to 30 people, whereas the Maple Lodge one, that's meant more for 7 or 8 people, and it's right on the lake, whereas Sugarbush Lodge, it's on the lake, but you actually have your own separate dock, so people can go deeper into this content, and you have your own entry then with this child post. So when you have this child post in there, it's its own separate entry, but it's tethered to this parent one. So then when I display Geneva Beach Resort on the front end, right below it, you can have all these links to these cabins. And also, from a search engine perspective, it knows all these cabins are related to this Geneva Beach Resort. So it just makes sense from the search engine's perspective, makes sense from the end user's perspective. So wrapping this all up with this low fidelity example here, at the end of the day, we knew for some of these sites that the towns is what kind of drives a lot of this traffic. And so we want that to be kind of like the holistic guide for if somebody's going to visit, if they're going to be staying there, the common, where to stay, what to do. The season taxonomy that I added in there, we use that for the guide because a lot of times we found people want a guided experience. They like the idea of all these resources available to them, but at the same time they like a tailored experience. So we put that season taxonomy in there to where we can put together that fall guide, that summer guide, that winter guide, and it'll kind of give them a tailored experience of what you can do at this time of the year. From the where to stay, we had the resorts custom post type, along with the cabins child post type. The things to do, the attractions, events, and then happenings from the blog post, happenings being, maybe something that's unique that's happening there. And then finding your way with the parametric search. Now, the beautiful thing about this is the taxonomies tie all these together. So if it is somebody who's looking at one of these towns, they can see what is there to do, where is there to stay, where to eat, all within this one spot. But if they're just curious about where they want to eat, they can also go and just look at all those. So it lets the end user pick how they want to view the content. And I did want to mention all the different tools that I had used in here. I mentioned toolset types. That was used for the custom post types, for custom fields, and the custom taxonomies. That one's on WordPress.org. That's a free one. Toolset views, that one is a paid one, but I do find it if you're not wanting to dig into custom templates, it's a fantastic plugin. You can set the content templates, you can set views with that, and then you can do the parametric search. And that's for if you're not a PHP developer, you can do all of this yourself. The CptOnAmis, that one is another one off of WordPress.org, so it's another free one. It's a fun one to play around with. And then I did use the events calendar in there for the event listings. But the tool set plugin suite, I think, is a really cool one if this is something that you really want to push and get a little bit deeper into. My name is Tyler Goldberg. I'm a strategist at CyberSprout. You can find me at cybersprout.net and on Twitter at tgold. And now I really want to turn it over to you and hear maybe some of the ways that you've used custom post types or taxonomies or archives to display content in unique ways, or if you have any questions.
How do you see this going into like WooCommerce and products in WooCommerce? Could each of those cabins been a product, or would you have to have a page for each of those cabins and then have to kind of embed a product within them?
I mean, you could have done it either way. So they could have been products that you set up as a child post type. So the question is for WooCommerce, how would that work as far as products in the cabins? So yeah, you could set up those products as a child post type of another post type, and then you link that underneath there. You could just find it simple to do it with the taxonomy, where you tether it together like that, but maybe that has to do more with something like merchandise for this tourism department. But you could also use that CptOnAmis one where you know that you already have these cabins and you want to tether those ones directly to these products you're selling. So if it is like a booking type functionality, you could do it in that manner as well.
Is there any such thing as too much custom post type? Tendency to custom post type way too much, I think, and I don't know. Does that slow down the server? Can it weigh too much in?
Okay, so the question is there such a thing as too many custom post types, and will it have any negative effects? I don't think speed-wise you'd have any issue. No different than normal if you have a large database. I don't think there'd be any real impact there. There is probably such a thing as too many custom post types, because I know I've definitely done that before, where, for example, on our own site, I had first started out with a portfolio and all these other custom post types. One thing I found is I really want people to see our work more than anything. And if I just added a separate taxonomy where I could categorize blog posts, the blog posts that were those portfolio examples, that way people, if they're going to our blog, could find our work, but they could also find our work under our portfolio. I really wanted them more than anything to see our work, so it made more sense for it to be in both spots. And I think, too, a big part of this is custom post types are so easy to maintain from the back end. Nobody wants to go on there and see this laundry list of like custom post types on the left where they've got to start scrolling up and down to try and find, oh, where was that? It kind of starts defeating the purpose. So there probably is, but it's probably more from a user experience perspective than it is from even a technical one. And then also thinking about, I always try and think, what would Google want when they see this site? It's got to make sense from their perspective too, as far as how it's structured. And I think there's a lot of power with custom post types for search engines, and we need to make sure, though, that we're doing it in a very intuitive way. Any other questions?
So the parameterized search,
Yes.
is that driven from the toolset types, or was that with one of the other plugins, or?
Yeah, so the parametric search, the question was how was that built? That was with toolset. That was with toolset views. That is a premium plugin, so you would have to pay for that. There may be some other parametric search plugins out there that you can use for free. I haven't really poked around WordPress.org, but it's really easy to use. You can set it to where it filters by taxonomies, filters by post types, keywords. So you can have it to where you punch in the keyword along with those taxonomies. So you can do it in a whole bunch of different manners. It's very flexible.
And then once you got the entry piece built on the back end to display it, did you use the views piece for that, or did you go down into code to do that?
As far as like setting up the actual filters and the search, or the display?
But just when you're going to show it on a page,
Oh, okay.
the parent-child
Yeah.
relationship stuff.
Yep. So the question was, once that parametric search is ready, how did I display it along with some of these others? There is a short code for the toolset views, so you would have to insert that into whichever page you want that to show up. So it's very simple. Once you've got that parametric search built, you just insert that short code wherever you want that to display. One thing with child post types is they don't inherently show up with their parent post type. So if you did build some child post types and you link them up, they're not just going to show up there. But there are a few plugins that will support that they'll say, that they'll detect. And these ones are on WordPress.org. If you just look for parent-child post types, that'll detect which one's the parent one and which one's the child, and they'll show a list along with it. And one thing, too, that's kind of cool about this as well with Toolset is it can detect what the taxonomy is for whether it be a parent post type or archive or any other post, and it can show related content to that. So it'll detect whatever the taxonomy is being used for the post or page it's being displayed on and display related content based on that. But yeah, Toolset and some other ones that if you search for just that parent-child relationship, you can definitely display that content with, so it's not too difficult.
I feel like I'm actually looking at the CptOnAmis plugin page right now.
Yep.
I feel like I'm not quite getting exactly what that does. Could you maybe just sort of explain that? Explain like the linking between custom post types and.
Yeah. So another example of where this may be used is like I'd worked on a plumbing site recently, and so they had on there, they wanted to list out all their services, and it made sense to use a custom post type for their services. So we put in there, water heaters, boilers, air conditioners, the typical stuff. Now they also wanted to put in their projects. They wanted to put in their bigger projects in there and feature and highlight that. But they wanted to, along with that, tie those together. So if they worked on, like they did this big plumbing project, they wanted to tie in which services they actually used on there. So then with this big project, they could say, oh, we did the boiler, we did the air conditioner, we did the water heater. So now these would show up on the sidebar for this project. And if somebody said, oh, well, my problem is a boiler, and I'm just curious what other projects they've done like that, they can click on this one. They can see all their other projects that they've done with the boiler. Does that make more sense?
It's basically what it says. I just needed it phrased.
Yep. No. Yeah. It's definitely a unique concept, and I thought it was really creative. The gal who came up with this plugin idea. But it isn't for every project because, like I said, it doesn't get picked up as a taxonomy, which it shouldn't from other plugins and that. So you do have to kind of weigh those benefits.
Similar question. I recently worked on a charity website and categorized news and events. And to do events, I used ACF. And the logic was if there's an upcoming event, it shows on the front page. Once the date is done, it goes into a repository. After I implemented the whole site, I thought about it. And I was wondering whether would it have been better to do a custom post type for an event or not. So this is my dilemma.
Yeah. Well, I mean, events, typically I would say not. So the question is, would it be better to do a custom post type for events? Were you using a plugin like the events calendar or something like that?
I wanted it to keep it simple so that it could be updatable, the code logic. Okay.
Oh, okay. And that's a tricky one because it's a very specific case, and it's something you almost have to dig a little bit deeper in. Because I mean, I've seen people that have run across this before, and events are very tricky because of their timeliness, and you want them to disappear when their time's done, which is why most people end up going with something like the events calendar plugin. Because I mean, they've probably $100,000 to $200,000 worth of development goes into just that plugin alone, and events can be so complex. So
And because this was a charity, I couldn't do the whole backend and Stripe connections and all that.
Yeah.
I just gave them a link to PayPal and take it from there. But yeah, that is the other dilemma, like how deep do we go in?
Yeah, and that's a really tricky one because it's very specific to each project, and I've definitely been in your same shoes. I mean, I've had it before where I just say, hey, look, here's your content block where you list out those events, and you have to remember where to take that off because they were on a very tight budget and they just wanted something super simple. So there's probably not a great answer for that unless they have the resources, the budget, that kind of thing to be able to get what they want.
Do custom post types interfere with categories at all? So like when I'm using PHP to loop through the categories to create the nav bar or something like that, will the custom post types show up as categories and need to be excluded, or are they a completely different thing?
So the question is, will custom post types and taxonomies or categories interfere with each other? There is the possibility if you use the same slugs that you can create some conflicts. You definitely want to, you want them to be unique. So I mean, if it's something like events and you want categories, you want to have like event categories as your slug. So there is some potential there, but otherwise, they should stay separate from each other. Well, thank you very much for having me, and have a great rest of your day.